It is a crossover Thursday, Week 18 regular season finale between two of the most storied franchises in NFL history. How might it go? Who are players to watch, keys to victory, and much more? You're going to get that on this crossover episode of Locked On Broncos and Locked On Raiders.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into a crossover episode here. Locked On Broncos, Locked On Raiders here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. We thank you so much, whether you're in Broncos country, whether you're in Raiders Nation, for making us your first listen of the day every single day. You can get these podcasts for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts here. But we have a very, very big episode in store because this is the season finale. Now, we got to start the season talking about these two teams here, the Denver Broncos and the Las Vegas Raiders. Now we got to talk about it at the end of it. First, let me tell you, this crossover Thursday episode is brought to you by PrizePicks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to PrizePicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code all lowercase LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Hugh, my friend, it's always great being able to sit down and talk with you here once again, man. It's been 18 weeks since the last time we've been able to do this, and man, what a whirlwind from that Week 1 preview to all the way here at Week 18. What is the biggest story here for the Las Vegas Raiders this week as they look to maybe conclude that, a last home game of the season with a potential win against an AFC West division rival that they've beaten 7 times in a row?
Well, I'll tell you, man, it's so wild and bizarre as you say that, we talked about this matchup on Week 1. Now it's Week 18, and so much has changed for both teams, right? I mean, neither one of these teams is the same team that they were in Week 1, but for the Raiders, man, the biggest storyline is how they finish this season off strong. Can they do enough, including beating the division opponent like the Denver Broncos, to solidify the head coaching position for Antonio Pierce? He's been taking over as the interim head coach since November 1st, since the Raiders fired Josh McDaniels on Halloween. And I know no Denver Bronco fans are going to shed a tear for Josh McDaniels or pour out any liquor for him because, well, Bronco fans know exactly what that's like, too. So we've been there, done that. But AP has been a breath of fresh air, man. He's been exciting. Raider Nation is super excited about him. The players in the locker room have talked glowingly about him, how they want him to get the job. Can they finish it off? Obviously, beating the Chiefs was a big deal on Christmas morning, but can they finish off the season strong? And will whatever they do on the field be enough to solidify that job and get that interim tag taken off Antonio Pierce's name? I think that's got to be the biggest storyline when it comes to the silver and black Week 18 versus Denver Broncos. How about you?
Well, let me say this. I'm going to share my thoughts on the Raiders here. I think what Antonio Pierce has done, and Q, you, like I said, you're around the team every day. You saw how things were with Josh. You saw the on-field product. But to see these guys flip the switch the way that they have and galvanize behind him, I'm just saying that the Raiders front office, I mean, obviously, Mark Davis, they need to get this right. They didn't get it right necessarily the first time when it happened with Rich Bisaccia. I remember that whole situation here. They have a chance to do it here with Antonio Pierce, and I'm very excited to see what they can do because it means more compelling matchups for you and I to talk about here in the future. Now, you talk about change. Well, geez, the Broncos have been a whole season of change. They started off 1-5. Russell Wilson was the quarterback, and then all of a sudden now Russell Wilson's not the quarterback. It's Jarrett Stidham, a face, and obviously somebody that Raider Nation is very familiar with. He stepped up in 2 games last year and put up really good numbers against that San Francisco 49ers number 1 ranked defense. Unfortunately, I mean, obviously didn't lead to wins here for the Raiders, but all circumstances considered, he was impressive in the small sample size that he had. Now he's looking to go back to a place where he's had a little bit of experience in. He knows some of those guys on that defensive side of the ball. We just saw Max Crosby this week calling Gardner Minshew a little boy in terms of every time he hit him. Yeah. And I guarantee you Max is going to bring that heat. But for me, I think the biggest story this week for the Broncos as they look to navigate what is expected to be the post-Russell Wilson era beginning in March. And, hey, he might be heading over to Las Vegas as a possibility. You just never know.
Yeah.
But for Jarrett Stidham, what will his second start look like? His first start last week against the Los Angeles Chargers, it wasn't great, but it wasn't bad either. He didn't put the ball into harm's way. He found Lil Jordan Humphrey for a touchdown, obviously a 54-yard catch and run, but he commanded the offense. There was a little bit more of an intermediate passing game, throws over the middle of the field, which Denver hasn't had that dynamic in their offense really at all this season until last week. So how does a second week in a row here for Jarrett Stidham getting reps under Sean Payton's offense, now potentially with the reintroduction of Courtland Sutton, who missed last week's game due to a concussion? He was back on practice early on this week and could be able to play, and obviously 10 touchdown catches for him on the season. having a big weapon like him, that could be a great security blanket for Jarrett Stidham. And look, I'm very, very curious to see, can Denver, even with that, with getting Sutton back, with getting maybe Marvin Mims back, having Jerry Jeudy, can the Broncos find a way to run the football? Which, if you ask anybody against the Raiders defense, that's a very, very tough task.
No, it is. The Raiders defense has played well all season long. It's only gotten better as the season has gone along, and AP and Patrick Graham have collaborated since AP's taken over as the interim coach. So that's been the best part of the Raiders team is the defense, which I didn't think that there was going to be a time where I'd come on here and say that the strength of the team is in the defense. But I wanted to go back real quick to Jarrett Stidham. Do you think, especially since there's going to be, if Russell Wilson is eventually released, like we all believe he's going to be, and there should be, $85 million in around dead money. Ooh. Is Jarrett Stidham a guy who you think could be in consideration to be the quarterback in 2024?
Yeah, that's what Sean Payton told us this week. He said that these reps, these next 2 weeks of reps are very valuable. Obviously, Sean goes back to what he saw, like when they signed him in the offseason to a 2-year deal. They said, we like what we saw from him. We believe he's got a really good trajectory as a number 2 quarterback. There's things that he does well that, in today's NFL, you know this as well from seeing everything that's gone on in Vegas. You have to have a pretty good backup. And obviously, We'll talk about Aidan O'Connell here in a little bit. Now he's emerged as the starter under Antonio Pierce. But, for Stidham, the expectation was, okay, hey, if something happens to Russ, can this guy step in and play? And Sean Payton believed that. And Sean told us on Monday in a conference call that, these reps are very valuable for him. He's still under contract next season. So to me, I think right now, if you had to do the odds-on favorite, I think that Jarrett Stidham is probably the odds-on favorite to start week 1 for the Broncos, unless they draft a guy in a 2024 NFL draft. And still, even if that's the case, Jarrett Stidham will more likely compete with that guy next year. So, this is, I think a name that Raiders Nation, obviously, from having him on your team last year to now saying, hey, this guy might be around for this game and potentially next year, you might have to get to know Jarrett Stidham's name a little bit further.
I'll tell you what, man, he's a pro's pro. Like everything that I saw from him from when he was at Stephenville High School to Baylor University. I didn't get to cover him when he went to Auburn, but I covered him at Baylor, covered him here when he was with the Raiders. The dude prepares. He's always ready. When he got that first start against the 49ers, he went out there and they lost the game, but he balled out. And Devontae Adams said, none of that surprises me. That's how he practices. He practices the right way. So I'm sure that you've gotten very familiar with him. He's a pro's pro, man. He's a guy that you root for. And I was shocked. I was super shocked when Sean Payton signed him immediately when free agency opened up. But here we go. The last 2 weeks of the season, similar to what happened with him last year as he took the place of Derek Carr, he's getting that same opportunity. I cheer for a guy like him, man. He does things the right way, and I'm happy he's getting his opportunity.
Yeah, he's a good dude there. And one thing I wanted to ask you as well here, from you seeing the shift from Josh McDaniels to Antonio Pierce and obviously being able to interact with him, you see the on-field product for the Raiders changing a little bit, and obviously this impacts the storyline that we talked about he's got to be the odds-on favorite to get the job next year. What has been the biggest overall shift, like the noticeable shift that you've seen with the team's mentality since he has stepped in?
They just have more, and I hate this word because I feel like it's overused, but they have more swagger. They have more attitude, and not cocky attitude, but they just have confidence, right? And you can see that they understand what they're supposed to be doing. Now they expect to go out and make plays. They're not hoping to make plays. They're expecting to go out and make plays, especially defensively. The offense is still suspect, but defensively, man, they're expecting to have takeaways. They're expecting to get to the quarterback. They're expecting to get strip sacks. They're expecting these things. They're going out with that mentality, that physicality. They're really, Cody, and I haven't used this in a long time, they're playing like Raider football. What you think of when you think of Raiders football, when they were a really good program and a really good team, that's what they're doing. And that all started with Antonio Pierce, who grew up a Raiders fan. So he kind of brought that Raiders swagger back that they had been missing for quite a while.
It's going to be very interesting to see if they can carry that out into Week 18. The Broncos hoping to end the 7-game win streak that the Raiders have against them. That's the one streak that is still left inside the AFC West. The Broncos snapped I think it was 17 game losing streak to the Chiefs this year. Now they're hoping to do it with the Raiders as well. One thing we are going to dive deep into, if you're a Broncos fan or if you're a Raiders fan, Q and I are going to talk about players that we have our eyes on the offensive side of the ball and the defensive side of the ball. You're going to get that here on today's crossover episode of Locked On Broncos, Locked On Raiders. This show was sponsored by BetterHelp. Around New Year's, we get obsessed with how to change ourselves instead of expanding on what we're already doing right. Maybe you finally organize one part of your space and you want to tackle another. Or maybe you're taking your supplements every morning and now you actually eat breakfast too. Therapy helps you find your strengths so you can ditch the extreme resolutions and make changes that really sticks. In times of the holiday season, especially when you start a new year, it can be tough. And there's no manual that comes with this thing that we have called life. And sometimes it's okay to not have all the answers, but you need to find a way to connect with yourself. And I've used BetterHelp therapy in the past. It's helped me at a time where I transitioned in careers and then got onto the road a lot, spent a lot of time away from family. There's a lot of things that come with that, and BetterHelp was a benefit to me as I use that in my day-to-day. And if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and best of all, suited to your schedule. You just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Celebrate the progress you've already made. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. As we continue to cross it over here on Locked On Broncos, Locked On Raiders, a Week 18 AFC West divisional showdown between two teams whose seasons didn't go how they had hoped. But could there be hope on the horizon for these two teams? Well, it's all going to come down to who's on the field on Sunday. And when you take a look at this game, Q, I look at the Broncos offense, their defense. I look at the Raiders offense, their defense. And there are a multitude of players that could have a big-time impact in this game. So I'm going to open it up to you, Q. If you had to give me a player here for the Raiders on the offensive side of the ball, and you had to give me a player on the defensive side of the ball that you feel like, hey, Sunday's game and this Week 18 season finale can set the tone for next season, who do you have your eye on and why?
Well, I'll tell you, the guy on offense I'm looking at is Zamir White. He's been filling in for Josh Jacobs the past couple of weeks. Josh has been out with a quad injury. I don't know if he's going to play. I actually highly doubt he plays on Sunday, and potentially that could be the end of the Josh Jacobs era in Las Vegas with the Raiders, which is weird since he's been around since being a first-round pick in 2019. But Zamir White was a fourth-round pick out of Georgia, didn't get much burn his rookie year, and really up until the last few weeks, didn't get too much of an opportunity this year either. He's done pretty well. You know, he's had a game where he went over 100 yards. Last week against the Colts, he went for 70-something yards and had about 30 yards in receiving as well. Obviously in the loss to the Colts, but I just want to see what he could do. Can he continue to stack W's? And what I mean by stacking W's is just having good reps and showing that he could be a guy that can carry the ball 15, 18, 20 times a game, because there is a reality that there's life after Josh Jacobs, right? There could be a reality where Josh Jacobs is not there, and that's all reliable. That's the guy who was the defending rushing champion from 2022. So, there's a chance that Zamir White could all of a sudden be elevated into that number one running back role. So I want to see how he looks against a Denver Bronco defense that is really stout. I mean, we all know that the Broncos have a really good defense. What is it going to look like? How is that offensive line going to open up holes for him? And is he going to be able to take advantage of it? He's not the fastest dude, but runs downhill, runs pretty strong behind his pads. And, this time of year, that's what you need. So offensively, that's what I'm looking at, Zamir White, just to see if he can have another performance like he has the last few weeks for the Silver and Black. And then defensively, I think it's all about Malcolm Kuntz. I really like what the Raiders and their defensive line has done this year. They have more than 40 sacks, which is really good for them. That was one of the goals, at least I threw out there. I thought 40 sacks, 20 takeaways is what they should get this year, and they've achieved that. And so I think that Malcolm Kuntz has emerged as a third-year edge rusher out of Buffalo. He has 7 sacks right now, and all of a sudden he's a compliment to Max Crosby. Like, everyone's paying attention to Max and what he's going to do for good reason. But now it's like, okay, who could compliment him? We all thought it was going to be Chandler Jones. Well, that didn't happen, right? He hasn't played all season. He's done. Hasn't been a Raider for a long time. He's doing his thing, and he's got some other issues going on that we hope, he gets taken care of. But, Tyree Wilson was drafted number 7 overall. Thought he was going to be that guy. He was slow to develop, still is developing. And along comes Malcolm Kuntz, the guy that we all thought was in the doghouse, and I believe was in the doghouse with Josh McDaniels for a long time. Now he's been unleashed. He's had multiple games with multiple sacks and strip sacks as well. And I think he's a difference maker, right? And if he can show and prove that he can be that guy across from Max Crosby and have a real legit 1-2 punch, then the Raiders defense has something really to be excited about moving forward and what they could do defensively. So the guy I'm looking at is 51, Malcolm Kuntz, and then Zamir White, number 35, offensively for the Silver and Black. What about you?
Oh, it's crazy what happens when Josh McDaniels leaves and other players start to thrive. And I think maybe an off-the-topic storyline I'm monitoring for, looking at the Raiders this year is, okay, how is it going to work with a lot of the Dave Ziegler, Josh McDaniels guys that were brought in? If, they go a new direction, is their level of patience different with that? What's their philosophy going to be? So I'm very eager to see that here. I think those are great things to watch. And obviously everyone would say Max Crosby. If you ask a Broncos fan, who are you worried about? They're going to say number 98, the Baba Yaga. But the reality of the situation here is that they have a very stout complement there, I think, in the secondary, watching them this season as well. They've been better than they have in years past. They just have, as you mentioned, with Antonio Pierce taking over, this dog mentality to it. And it's something that the Broncos are going to have to watch out for. So for me, on the Broncos offensive side of the ball, I think so much of it's going to be contingent upon whether or not they can run the ball, right? Which is a major question. I mean, Denver's offense this year, when they've been able to run effectively and run for over 130 yards a game, usually they're finding ways to win. They haven't really found a spark in the run game. They haven't even had one running back this year go over 100 yards in a single game. It hasn't happened. Javonte Williams is still trying to get comfortable, and I imagine he might be a little bit back to form next season. This was, I think, a trial year for him coming off the major leg injury that he suffered, the major knee injury that happened last year against the Raiders in that first matchup that they had inside Allegiant Stadium. But for me, I'm going to go with Jarrett Stidham here because so much of the offensive operation is going to go through him. Last week against the Chargers, I felt like, okay, hey, we didn't see the greatest performance. And I think a lot of that was, okay, you're getting a guy his first reps of the year who hasn't had any opportunities to get a sample size with these guys, hasn't had a lot of chance to build chemistry with these guys outside of the practice squad wide receivers, right? So what does that look like for a second week in a row when you connect with a guy like Jerry Jeudy? I mean, Jerry had a catch, his biggest catch and run of the season last week, 41 yards right before halftime. Unfortunately, Denver missed a field goal, which that was a storyline in that first Broncos matchup that they had against the Raiders in week one. And that could have been game-changing for them in terms of the impact and maybe the severity of what's at stake in this game. But Jarrett Stidham has to come in. I think a little more accuracy, right? There are a couple passes he had, especially in the quick passing game where it was behind receivers. They had to body adjust, put in bad positions and situations. Jarrett Stidham is going to be a major key here for Denver's offense going forward in this game. And look, he's going to have to counteract, as you mentioned, Kuntz. He's going to have to counteract, obviously, Max Crosby. And I guarantee you they're going to send pressure with some inside linebacker blitzes. I thought Patrick Graham did a really great job in that first matchup against the Broncos of really trying to send pressure after Russell Wilson. Jarrett Stidham is more of a pocket guy, so they're going to do whatever they can to disrupt that and make it very uneven for him as he goes through his progressions. Defensively, for me, I think I'm going to have to look at Fabian Moreau here at cornerback. Now, everyone's going to say Patrick Surtain, right? Because we talked about, that first matchup Patrick Surtain had this season against Davante Adams, got the best of Davante in that matchup. These guys have had some really great battles so far over the course of Davante's career as a Raider and Pat's career as a Bronco. But, I think everyone's going to focus on that one. But what hurt the Broncos in the last game, Jacoby Myers. Myers absolutely had a field day. I mean, 2 touchdown catches against Damari Mathis, back shoulder throw. And you look at what Jacoby has done for the Raiders this season. He's been a huge impact player for them. And Denver has struggled against some of those guys this season. So Fabian Moreau, who ended up upending Damari Mathis from the starting job, he's going to get that play, obviously, as a veteran cornerback. And I think that's going to be one of the more crucial matchups here that we have to keep our eye on. You talk about Zamir White. I had it in here. Is Josh Jacobs going to play? Question mark. Because obviously I looked at the practice report, still battling that quad. But Zamir White, as you mentioned, the downhill runner. And if Denver can't stop the run, then that's when the Raiders will probably take a little bit of a game plan out of what the Detroit Lions did, what the New England Patriots did, and start carving up the middle of the field and trying to do that. Because if you create an uneven balance for the defense, it makes it hard to stop the bleeding. So for me, Fabian Moreau, I think against Jacoby Myers is going to be one of the big matchups I have my eye on here this week.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good one because Jacoby has been great for the Raiders. He really has. I mean, he got concussed in that first game against the Broncos, and so he missed week 2, but he's been fantastic all season long. I mean, when he was in New England, he was a number 1. He goes to the Raiders. Obviously, you're not going to be a number 1 over Davante Adams, but man, you're a really good number 2, right? So it's been a nice 1-2 punch, and it's really been what the Raiders needed was that guy that can be the Robin to Davante's Batman. And so he's been fantastic, leads the team with touchdown catches. So he's that guy. And I do think that he's going to be a guy that's going to be relied upon a lot in this game as well. So I think when you talk about, players to pay attention to, those are great matchups that you're talking about right there.
We'll see. It could decide the outcome of Sunday's game, Allegiant Stadium, 2:25 p.m. Mountain Time. That's 1:25 Pacific Time kickoff. And you can obviously check out the post-game coverage of Locked On Broncos and Locked On Raiders after the game from myself and your boy Q as they break down all the action from Sunday's season finale to set the table for what's ahead for both these teams and what we expect to be a very busy offseason. But if the Broncos or the Raiders are going to find a way to come away with a victory in Week 18, what are some things that they're going to have to do? We'll dive deep into that here on today's crossover episode of Locked On Broncos, Locked On Raiders. Today's crossover episode is brought to you by our friends over there at LinkedIn Jobs. At the start of the new year, every small business owner is asking themselves the same question. What's the one move I can make that'll make my business and take it to the next level here in 2024? LinkedIn Jobs, they know that your success all depends on the team that you surround yourself with. And that's why LinkedIn Jobs has created the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn has a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find your boy Q on LinkedIn, and you might be on LinkedIn as well. And hiring is easy when you have that many quality candidates. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. Make sure you achieve your goals for your business here in 2024 with the right team member, and you can find them at LinkedIn Jobs. And on top of that, LinkedIn also knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and might not have the time or the resources to hire. Thankfully, with LinkedIn, the process is intuitive, it's quick, and it's easy. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. As we jump into the fourth quarter here of today's crossover episode between Locked On Broncos and Locked On Raiders, we're ringing in the new year for each of these teams. Everybody in Broncos country, everybody in Raiders nation. One thing is the constant. The rivalry between these two teams is always heated, and it comes to a head here on Sunday at Allegiant Stadium here. And there's going to be a list of things that each team, when they go into their meetings throughout the entire week, when they go into their pregame speech in the locker room, if we do these things, we're going to come away with a victory here. So Q, if you are, let's say, in that room there with Antonio Pierce, you're hearing him deliver the speech to the Raiders, what is it that they have to do in this game, offense, defense, or even collectively as an entire unit, if they're going to walk away from Sunday's season finale with a victory against the Broncos, their 8th straight, if they do make it that?
They're going to have to be bullies. And what I mean by that, they're going to have to be physical. They're going to have to do what's got them to where they're at right now, what's really buttered their bread all season long. And, it's not the precision passing game. It's not the high flying offensive attack, hit Devontae Adams. It's not all that. It's about what they could do defensively. It's how they are in the trenches, and it's how their run game goes. The identity of an Antonio Pierce-led team is to be a strong downhill running team and play a very strong physical defense. It's just that simple. We all know Antonio Pierce won a Super Bowl ring with the New York Football Giants, and we remember what their style was. Well, apples don't fall far from the tree, right? That's his style. That's who he is. When he took over as the interim head coach, he said, our team goes through Josh Jacobs. And so, again, Josh Jacobs might not play on Sunday. Good chance he doesn't. So, again, it's going to go to Zamir White, which means the offensive line has got to win in the trenches. They've got to be able to be the bullies. They've got to be able to push the Broncos defensive line back, let Zamir White get some openings. Once the run game gets going, everything else opens up. Aidan O'Connell, still a rookie quarterback. He's still learning. He still makes mistakes, and he still has really good weapons like Jacoby Myers, as we mentioned, as Devontae Adams. They've got Hunter Renfrow. Doesn't get a lot of burn these days, but he's still there on the roster. He still he can go. They're going to throw the ball to the tight end like Austin Hooper. I don't know if Michael Mayer is going to play. The rookie tight end, he's dealing with the toe injury. He hasn't played the last couple of games, so most likely he probably won't play either. But Austin Hooper's still really good. But it's all about the physicality. It's all about the trenches. It's all about the run game. And then defensively, they've got to get a couple takeaways, man. That's one thing that they've really been hanging their hat on is expecting to go get the ball, right? If it's the secondary, if it's the defensive line, Malcolm Kuntz, I mentioned him earlier in the show. He's the guy that not only tries to sack the quarterback, but tries to sack the ball and take that ball away. And he's done that consistently throughout the course of the year as he's come up with 7 sacks already. Max Crosby obviously leads the team in sacks with 13.5, but Malcolm Kuntz has been a nice the number 2 to the 1-2 punch there on that defensive line. So they've just got to continue to play their style ball, realize that it's their last game, know that they're at home, got their fan base and, behind them ready to see a show and go out there and put on that show. Antonio Pierce met with us on Wednesday and said, man, we're going to get that bad boy rocking. Like, that's how we're going to go out to close out this season. And so they're fired up. They're excited. Like I said, they're playing for their coach. They want him to be the full-time coach, get that interim tag removed. And the way for them to do it is be physical, be strong, run the ball really well, get a couple takeaways. Obviously, to get takeaways, you got to get to the quarterback as well. So, look out for 98 and 51 coming screaming off the edges. And honestly, man, something that's been a nice, pleasant surprise as of late has been the interior push that the Raiders have gotten from guys like Adam Butler, John Jenkins, even Tyree Wilson, who's drafted to be an edge rusher, but he's been getting some burn on the inside. They've really been going with kind of that NASCAR package that the Giants used back in the day. Antonio Pierce likes that as well. So they've had success there too. So look for number 9 to line up potentially on the interior of the Raiders defensive line. But that's what it's all about, man. It's just going in there, being the bullies, punch the other team in the mouth, and punch them repeatedly until they submit, which is what they did to the Chargers a few weeks ago, which is crazy, on their way to 63 points. Now, I don't expect no kind of game like that, but I do know that mentality is what they're going to go into the game with on Sunday.
Well, and you see it as well. I mean, the enthusiasm that they have there. It's contagious. You could definitely see it. And I think one thing as well for Denver, they can't allow, and this kind of plays into yours, right? You're telling it that the Raiders have to go in, they have to dictate, they have to go in and impose their will. Against the New England Patriots and against the Detroit Lions, the Broncos allowed those teams to impose their will against them and allowed them to dictate what they were going to do. And you simply can't do that here because, look, the Raiders aren't going anywhere. Denver's going to see them 2 times per season. And if Antonio Pierce is the head coach, you're getting a little bit of a preview as to what you can expect from a Raiders team going forward, pending whatever offseason moves do come their way this year. So for Denver offensively, I think so much of it, they've got to be better on third down. They have been one of the worst teams in the NFL on third down. Now, early on in the season, they found themselves backed up by penalties. Penalties were a huge issue for them. Offensively, I mean, they have a false start and a hold every once in a while. It hasn't been as consistent as early on. But when Denver has found themselves in 1st and 20, 1st and 15, or even 2nd and 20, 2nd and 15, heck, there was even a time I think they were in 3rd and 34 this year at one point. When Denver's found themselves behind the sticks, and you can't afford to have that happen against the Raiders because Max Crosby, he's going to pin his ears back, and they're going to just send him. They're going to unleash him after that. And that's where if you try to force things, it can lead to turnovers. And I think Denver, for the most part, last week against the Chargers, they did a pretty good job of not putting the ball into harm's way, though Jarrett Stidham did throw a couple of passes into double coverage that should have been intercepted. Luckily, the Broncos, Jerry Jeudy turned into a defensive back in one of those plays there. But you can't make those types of mistakes here against the Raiders because they have, in a sample size under Antonio Pierce, they've demonstrated the ability to do that, to take it away effectively, and then they convert on it on their next offensive drive. Now, I think so much of that, what will help Denver is if they have balance. And Q, man, I tell you what, for as much as the Broncos have turned things around from 1-5 to obviously winning 5 games in a row, and where they're at now with the chance to get their first winning season since 2016, which it's been that long since the Broncos have had a winning year. It's crazy to think about. Trevor Siemian was the quarterback that year for the Broncos. That's where things kind of get a little messy here for Denver. But the thing for the offense, they had to find balance, and they just simply haven't done that consistently enough. When the run game's working, the passing game hasn't been great. But when they have balance, when the run game is working, they're able to do some things and start to slice you up a little bit in the passing game. We haven't seen the Broncos get to that style of football, I mean, really since their last winning streak that they had, and it all ended against the Houston Texans. So if Denver can get back to that against this Raiders defense that is ultra-aggressive, and look, at times you can capitalize against an ultra-aggressive defense and catch them slipping, but you got to be correct with it. You got to take those calculated risks, and we'll see if Sean Payton has Jarrett Stidham open it up a little bit. Defensive side of the ball here for the Broncos, I think a lot of it, you mentioned, he's a rookie quarterback. You have to find a way to pressure Aidan O'Connell. The Broncos in the last few weeks, they've had some quarterbacks outside of Easton Stick. They really limited the Chargers to a very bad third down percentage. But we talk about where they're at on first and second down defensively. Guys like Bailey Zappi and veteran guy there, and obviously Jared Goff, they carved the Broncos up on those pass on the deep back shoulders, which they're going to throw that to Jacoby. I've seen that on film. Yeah. They're going to go the deep overs to Devontae. See that on film. Denver has to be able to send pressure after Aidan O'Connell, and that starts with Baron Browning, who could be back after being on concussion protocol all last week. Jonathan Cooper, who leads the team with 8.5 sacks, and then Nick Bonito in the NASCAR package that has 7.5 sacks, leads the team in TFLs with 11. You have to send pressure after these guys. I imagine Denver's going to come out in their heavy front this week, kind of similar to what we saw in week 1 when Josh Jacobs was under center. So if Denver can pressure Aidan O'Connell, as you mentioned, force him to make some rookie mistakes, get a couple of takeaways, I think the Broncos can capitalize on it, but they have to have the stars aligned to be able to do that. And I think they're going to have a good game plan, but can they counter what the Raiders are going to throw at them? That is the biggest question here.
Yeah, no, it feels like it. And it feels like these teams kind of have, similar styles in which they kind of want to play this game coming up on Sunday. So I'm definitely looking forward to it. One of the things about this game is different from week 1 is, now Aidan O'Connell is the quarterback and he has a stronger arm. So you may see a couple deep shots at Trey Tucker. He's a rookie and he's got speed. And the Raiders haven't had that speed since Henry Ruggs was released. And we know that was a tragedy that led to that release. But, yeah, this is another number 11. It's not Ruggs, but it's Trey Tucker, and he's got that speed. He can stretch the field. He's continuing to start to get his feet wet and everything. He's not a not polished wide receiver by any stretch of the imagination, but he still has the speed. And I do believe if Aidan O'Connell's given the time, which is obviously the biggest key there, if given the time by the offensive line, he'll take a couple deep shots as well.
We'll see how it all plays out this Sunday. Allegiant Stadium, 2:25 p.m. Mountain Time, 1:25 p.m. Pacific Time. Q is going to be at the game. He's going to get you fired up for the pregame on, obviously, Raiders Nation Radio. On top of that, he's going to lead you to everything you need to know here on the Locked On Podcast Network on Locked On Raiders. If you're a Broncos fan that's going to make the trip out to Vegas, make sure you have a safe trip as well. Enjoy the game between these two teams. Week 18, they're all trying to get a win. There's a little bit of something for each team at stake, even though the both teams are out of the playoffs. And unfortunately, Q, this is our last crossover that we have until next year. So with that said, Broncos Country, Raiders Nation, we'll see you next year for another crossover episode. Locked On Broncos, Locked On Raiders.